This is about 10 years since I did my first country living camp meeting seminar here in Washington Conference. I designed this seminar, not this one, but the one then, for a non-Adventist. Because I didn't know if a non-Adventist would watch the video or attend the meeting. So my original presentation was designed like a seminar. I'm a teacher, so I told them this is a class, this isn't a sermon. And so we're going to have a textbook. And the first session, the textbook was Country Living. The next one was Last Day Events. The next one was Ministering to the Cities. So instead of quoting manuscript release, blah, 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 I would just say our textbook, Country Living, page 56. It's not even that big. 13. So that Adventists would know, but a non-Adventist wouldn't get thrown off. And so that was the premise of that seminar. And I'll tell you in a minute about our journey and how that even came to be. But the first session that I did of this was over in the home ec science building, this side of the auditorium. And there were so many people that came that we had to move because the fire marshal said the room capacity wasn't allowing that many people. So they moved us to the boys' dorm chapel, which is a horrible place to do a seminar because the sunlight comes in through those big windows and you couldn't see the screen, and it's hot. And so they ended up eventually putting us in this room, and this works as good as any would on campus. So I'm thankful that we're here. The presentation today is different for the most part if you have been to one of my previous seminars. The original one was called Preparing for the Time of Trouble. And my website is preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. And so that original presentation focused on the biblical and spirit of prophecy reasons why you should move out into the country and be preparing in that way. This isn't the whole emphasis of this presentation, though we will do some of that in review if you were in the previous. The purpose of this one, the angle of this presentation is if we were having a catastrophic thing happen where we couldn't live the normal life, where an EMP, and we'll talk about what that is, happened and the grid went down permanently. So there's no electricity, there's no internet, no going to the grocery store, you can't spend money. What are you going to do?
Can't drive your vehicle either.
Huh?
You won't be able to drive your modern vehicles.
No, you won't. No, it won't start. Or it could be a cyber attack. And then those things would still work, but because the grid's down, now the fuel pump won't work at the gas station and you can't do your transaction with your credit card. So even though your car still runs, you can't go anywhere. Another thing, of course, we know that the Bible says there'll be a time when you can't buy or sell if you're faithful to God. So if you can't buy or sell, what are you going to do? Now, some will say, and it may be a majority, I don't know, but they'll say, well, God will take care of me. I don't need to do anything. My bread and water will be sure. Well, what I did in that original seminar is showed how there is a difference between the time when you need to have a garden and the time when you need to flee and God will feed you. What is the time when you need to have a garden? What do we call that time? The little time of trouble. And when does it start, do you think?
Looks like now.
It could very well be. I kind of think it's the Sunday law kind of is the nail in the coffin. If let's take, for example, if there was this weekend a national Sunday law, how serious of a Sunday law do you think it would be? I don't think it'd be serious. I don't think we'd even hardly notice it. It would be, well, we're going to close stores on Sunday. Don't mow your lawn. You know, we're going to take care of Mother Earth, right? And most people wouldn't even blink. So we in this room would go, wait a minute, that's the sign. So we go to church, all excited. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And what's going to happen to the people that you tell about this? A lot of people in church are going to go, oh, you're just overreacting. You're just a fanatic. It's conspiracy theory, right? And what do we call that difference of opinion that would accelerate? What do we call that? The shaking. I think that's going to bring the shaking on strong, because there's going to be a division between people that think you're crazy and people that are getting serious. Anyway, I'm getting off subject here, but it's a serious question, because I believe that when there is a national Sunday law, as benign as it will be to begin with, I believe, it should be the sign to us to pull out all the stops. It's the time to not have stocks or savings or that fancy classic car that I used to have, or any of these, an extra house, or you need to get debt free. You need to be thinking about, what am I going to do if I have to survive when I can't buy or sell? And you ramp that up, and you go out and you buy those supplies that you know you need, but you haven't done it. You know, I think that's going to be the right response. It's going to be God saying, hey guys, this is it. We've talked about this our whole life, and now you have a Sunday law right in front of you. What are you going to do? And if it's going to be business as usual, you're not going to make it. You're going to have to get serious all of a sudden, more than ever. Anyway, so the emphasis of the seminar last time, if you happen to have been here, was the 7 stages of the Sunday law and the 3 times of trouble. And when will these things be? Now, I tried to record this last time, and just like now, my audio didn't work. And so I couldn't record it and put it on the website. So unfortunately, I have the 3 times of trouble, that's on our website. I've got a handout with the address and all that. But I don't have the 7 stages of the Sunday law. But anyway, so that's what was last time. The 7 stages of the Sunday law, the 3 times of trouble, and when will these things be? People ask me all the time. Somebody asked me today, how long do you think the time of trouble is going to be? The little time of trouble. How long are we going to have to be able to store up food and grow our garden and stuff? I don't know. I personally think God's given us some clues, but that's a subject for another time. Because if I tell you what I think, I'm probably going to be in trouble with people.
Oh, come on.
I happen to agree with Doug Batchelor, put it that way. If you search Google and do Daniel 12, Doug Batchelor, you'll find his Sabbath school presentation at Sacramento Central Church. When the quarterly was talking about Daniel 12, when the quarterly was talking about Daniel, the very last session, he spent an amazing presentation on what he thinks the answer to that question is. And he got so much mail and emails and challenges. And I've written this book because people would ask me at my seminars, yeah, you've got a website and you've got 400 videos, but if the internet's down for good, I can't get any of those resources. You need to print a book with the nuts and bolts. So I spent 6 months last fall and I wrote the book, and you can, if you want to buy one here, I've got a special price that's cheaper than you could buy it online. But my second book is spiritual preparation for the time of trouble. This is talking about physical preparation, and people would say, but spiritual is more important. I couldn't agree more. So I wrote a second book, it's not published yet, called Spiritual Preparation. The third book, I haven't started, I'm researching, and I'm hesitant whether I should publish it, but it's addressing that question about Doug Batchelor's presentation. And I think if I do that book, I probably won't ever be able to teach a class on it, because it's a controversial thing. But anyway, that's when will these things be. So the last seminar last year was different than this one. And the one today is different than the original 3. Because the original 3 were talking about the Bible and spirit of prophecy reasons to move out of the city. This one's talking about how can we sustain ourselves now that we're out in the country, and what if I'm not in the country? What if I'm in the 10th floor in an apartment in downtown Seattle, and I'm praying for God to help me get out of the city, but I'm not out of the city? And we're going to talk about ways that you can learn to garden from the 10th floor balcony in your apartment. So that's what we're doing today. And the reason we're doing that is I'm doing this seminar at VC camp meeting in a month, and it's a day longer camp meeting because it's a full camp meeting. And the conference president told me, he says, I want you to address what people do about gardening that haven't moved in the country yet. So I'm adding a whole section, of which you'll see some of it today, about things that people can do if you're in a situation where you're not in that ideal situation yet. What can I do? Because part of this is learning how to garden. And you can't just say, well, when there's a Sunday law, then I'll move. Well, maybe you won't be able to sell your place. Maybe you won't be able to find the property. And even if you could, how long does it take to plant fruit trees and to get productive fruit? You can't just do it. And I can tell you from our experience, and I'm sure you can too, that you can't just stick seeds in the ground and expect them to grow. It's a whole science. You've got to learn. You've got to figure out what worked and what didn't where I live, and how am I going to adjust and make it go, and so forth. So anyway, it's a different twist than if you've been to my seminars before, is what I'm trying to say. So today we're going to focus on, first of all, I'm going to tell you our personal country living journey, and we've gone full circle on that. And then we're going to review the end of life as we know it, the reasons why things could change quickly. And then if the grid goes down, what are the dangers? Or how could it happen even? And then we'll review some of Ellen White's counsel on moving out of the cities. And then we'll do this balcony gardening. How do you live in a 10th floor apartment in Seattle and still learn how to garden? So that's the agenda today. Tomorrow, we're going to look at alternatives to the grid on which we live. So when we think about being off-grid, if you go to a country living seminar, and there have been many people who have done them that we've attended, the emphasis most of the time seems to be buying property and being off-grid. Well, Ellen White never said we had to do either one of those things. We don't have to buy property. We can rent. God could even give you land. Don't miss Friday. Or, you can grow a garden even if you're not even in the country yet. So, but when we think about being off-grid, we think of electricity. These people in northern Idaho, they're off-grid. No, I just love being off-grid. I don't have to pay a power bill. Yeah, okay, but you invested $30,000 in batteries and solar panels. It's not free, but you're not connected to the grid. But there's other grids. There's the food grid. There's the water grid, the heat grid, the financial grid, the information grid, the medical bill, grid. Anytime you pull out your wallet and pay for a service, you're accessing some kind of a grid. And if you can't buy or sell, that wallet stays in your pocket. So what are you going to do about food? What are you going to do about power if you want power? What are you going to do about water and heat and finances and information and medical? Thursday, we're going to then, let's say you are praying that God will help you find the right country property. You might even already be in the country and find out that, well, it's not the right property because I don't have any firewood on my property, so I can't depend on getting a permit from the Forest Service to go and cut firewood. So anyway, we're going to talk about what the ideal country property is. We're going to look what to look for. We're going to actually tour a country property, and then I'm going to show you tools on how to find information about that property. And then on Friday, preparation or presumption. So are you going through these exercises of getting these things ready because you're having faith in God and doing what He wants? Or are you like a doomsday prepper in a matter of survival and you're kind of leaving God out of the picture? So we're going to find a balance between the physical preparation and the spiritual preparation. And if I do a seminar again, the next time it will be spiritual preparation for the time of trouble. An amazing true story of God's leading. Do not miss this. This is phenomenal, bar none. And then some turnkey country property opportunities. If you want to know a place where you can go and spend a week and learn some of these skills by professionals, we're going to have someone here that will tell you how you can do that. That same individual also has a brand new opportunity. If you are, let's say, 75 years old, female, widow, you're on a fixed income, you want to do country living, but it's really not practical all by yourself. This is an opportunity to live country living in Montana with like-minded other Adventists in your own dwelling place in a beautiful setting. Anyway, you'll see that on Friday. The person that has this place will be here in person. So, people in my seminars, we usually have question and answer times after, and there were questions that would come up like, yeah, well, you've got these 400 videos, but what if the grid goes down? I won't have access to all this information. You need to print a book so I can have it sitting on my shelf. So if the world goes to pot, I can go over and grab that book. So last fall, I wrote a book with all the things that we've learned. Sustainable country living. And what about me? I can't buy. Well, you can rent. What about me? I'm too old. I'm too young. And what can I do while I'm still in the city? And the need for off-grid resources. So that book I have with me. You can buy it online, but I have made arrangements for you if you want to buy one. I can get you an autographed copy here, and it'll be cheaper than you could buy it anywhere, because I'm paying part of it. Now, before we start, I want to explain the word sustainable, because this is sustainable country living. The emphasis here is sustainable. How do we live in the country and be able to keep going and not run out of food and run out of whatever? In the word sustainable means something different. It means taking care of Mother Earth. It means like the Agenda 21, if you've heard about that. Now there's Agenda 2030. Their idea is basically, in a nutshell, to move everybody into the city, to take care of the country and leave it natural. So that just makes it harder. And they make these sustainable communities. This is an example. I taught a class online, a college class called Sustainable Construction. The textbook was called Integrated Design for Sustainable Building. And here's a quote from it. Most of the dwellings are within a 5-minute walk to the center. Transit stop located at the center. So the idea is they have this little sub-community inside of the city where everything you need is within walking distance. And you can get on a transit to get out, you've got grocery stores, all that stuff's right there. That's the idea. The problem is that's completely the opposite of what we know we ought to be doing. So my definition of sustainable is being able to perpetually sustain yourself in your situation, which you're not going to do if you have to go and buy everything. Ellen White says, again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions, for in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. This one sentence has changed my life. Notice the end. In the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a serious one. So what? So move out of the country. Why? So you can raise your own provisions. That's the key. If you live in a situation where you have to pull your wallet out for everything you do, you need to pray for God to help you to get out of there and do something different. It doesn't have to be 100 acres. It doesn't have to be off-grid. You don't even have to own it. But God wants you to be able to have peace out in the country. Now here's our personal story. If you look at this picture, this is a riding arena across the private road from where we lived. If you look right in the corner, That little white spot is our house. You can see we're surrounded by trees and pasture and horses, and we had our own little pond. We designed the house with sustainability in mind. We had a wood stove insert in the fireplace. The problem is we didn't have enough land with wood to have a perpetual source of firewood. And what people would do is they'd get a permit from the fire service and go and cut firewood and bring it in. Well, if you can't buy or sell, maybe you can't get that permit. So this was the only problem with this property. Plus it wasn't very private. We're looking across at the riding arena and houses, and this was the main entrance on the highway, or on the other side of the trees. So people were coming and going. But we raised our kids in the country ever since they were born. And we've been married 47 years, so that was, 45, 46 years we were living in the country. And as the years went by and we relocated, the property size got bigger. The first was a lot, but it was not surrounded by anybody. And then the next one, we were on 5 acres, and the next one we ultimately bought neighboring properties till we had 27. That's this one here. Well, the kids grew up. They went away to school. They went to UCA and Southern, and then we're just the two of us. My son, who's a dentist in Illinois, likes to say, well, I used to mow the lawn, and when I went away to school, they sold the place because it was too much work for Dad to mow the lawn. Well, that's not really true, but it's a good joke. But it was 2.5 acres to mow. And the thing is that when they left, back up a little bit, my parents had been snowbirding in Arizona with a bunch of relatives in this RV park. And they would say, why don't you come down and check it out? Come down for Christmas or something. We think, who would want to go to the desert? Scorpions, snakes, cactus. That doesn't sound like Christmas to me. Well, one day we decided to humor them, and we went down there. And it was 75 degrees and shorts and golfing and sunshine. And I thought, wow, I could get used to this. This is pretty amazing. I know why they're going south. So then as time went along, and this is before this picture, we had a business and we sold it. Thanks the Lord for selling it. And we had never had money. We never knew what to do. We didn't have any stocks or investments or anything. We didn't have any experience in investing. And so we thought, what should we do with some of the proceeds here? And we decided, the baby boomers are going to retire. They're going to all want to go south. They're all going to want to play golf. Why don't we buy a house in an adult community on a golf course and let Mom and Dad live in it when they go down south instead of that 18-foot camping trailer? So we did that, and it worked out great. Well, the years went by, and eventually they got to where they couldn't go anymore, and we got to the point where we retired, and we were teachers in the educational system, and I'd gotten to where I could teach online, which meant I could take it with me to Arizona. So we now got to the stage where we could now spend the winter in Arizona instead of just vacations. So we locked up the place and we went to Arizona. And we had this all arranged. We had a house sitter, which is somebody from church, but we didn't trust him to mow the lawn because he'd probably run the lawnmower into the lake, literally. My dad was going to mow the lawn, but he got shingles and couldn't get out of bed. We tried to arrange remotely for the neighbor kid to mow the lawn, but the mother wouldn't let him use the lawnmower. By the time we got back, this whole thing of having this country property had turned sour. It's like it took us weeks or a month to put that place back into shape. And it's like, what are we going to do? This just doesn't work. We said, okay, we've either got to sell the Arizona house and quit doing Arizona, or we got to sell the country property. Well, you don't want to live in Arizona year round, I can assure you of that. 119 degrees when we moved in the shade. So we decided, we talked to the kids, and they were away in college, and they said, look, we're not going to go back to rainy Grace Harbor. Just sell the place. So we sold the place, and we said, we're going to build a house just like Arizona. We're going to build a 60-foot lot on a golf course with a view of Mount Rainier, brand new. We can just lock it and leave. Lock it and leave, back and forth. This is perfect. We can live this way until we die. This is great. We even had duplicate clothes, so we didn't have to carry clothes. We have 2 of everything now. But then our daughter got married to a guy that lived in Arizona, 20 miles from where we were. And by the way, we were in Mesa, Arizona, 500,000 people, and it's a suburb. It's the largest suburb in the United States. We were in the middle. Leisure World, which is this place, that's not our house, but that's Leisure World. It's a square mile of retirees, 2 golf courses, and we were right in the middle, so it was quiet, even though there were 4-lane highways all the way around that development. We used to say you could go out the southern gate and you had everything you wanted. Southern gate, there's Walmart, Olive Garden, etc., etc. You can go out the north gate, there's a heart hospital and a hospital and a mortuary. Everything you need is right out the gate, walking distance. Well, anyway, so we bought that place, and now we're going to build this house in Washington, same setup, and it was perfect. Well, then we went down to Arizona. This time is when we had the house sitter and all that. We went down for the winter, and our daughter and son-in-law said, "Hey, you want to go to the church? They're having a weekend thing on country living." And we go, yeah, that'd be great. We like gardening. So we went to this, sustainable preparedness. The folks from northern Idaho, Meissner's, put it on. They did a bang-up job. And we were halfway through the meetings, and my wife and I looked at each other and we said, "What have we done? This is not what God told us to do. This is just the opposite. We went from 27 acres to a 60-foot lot. This is stupid. We can't do anything without pulling out our wallet. We can't even garden in either place." So we and our daughter and son-in-law decided right then and there we were going to get out of Dodge. We didn't know where, we didn't know how, but we were going to get out of Dodge, and we were going to get in a sustainable country situation. So we considered Northern California, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Washington, and British Columbia. We're all dual citizens. And we landed in Washington again, which I love, Western Washington. So we're in Arizona. We had a couple of wake-up calls. My wife goes to Sprouts, which is like a large Trader Joe's. And she went to the produce section at 10:30 in the morning, and everything was gone. Now keep in mind, we had been thinking about this sustainable, how can we redo our life so that we can live in the country and be able to take care of ourselves even if everything goes to pot. And ironically, Washington Conference had offered for me to teach a seminar that next summer on that subject of country living, and I'm living in a 500,000 population city, and they've asked me to do a thing on country living. So I spent 6 months researching everything I could about country living, Ellen White, the Bible, doomsday prepper shows. I watched every one of them, everything I could find out about how to be sustainable. And so then that's the mindset. Then Kathy goes to the grocery store, and all the produce is bare. Keep in mind, we know that if the grid goes down within 3 days, everything on all the shelves will be gone. At the time, it sounded pretty preposterous. But remember toilet paper during COVID? I mean, we've seen it, and that was global. So she asked the produce manager, "What's going on? How come there's nothing in here?" And she said, "Well, the truck hasn't arrived today. Today. Every day. So if the truck can't roll, the produce section is empty within 24 hours. And then all the shelves will be empty within 3 days." Then we came back to Washington. I designed the house. I had a natural gas fireplace. This is great. Power went out for 5 days. You know what? I can't light the fireplace without electricity. Even though the natural gas is still going, I couldn't get the heat going. We said, "This is so stupid. We have made such a big mistake here. We have got to change." So let's talk about what can make life change. from what you're used to.
The people were eating out of the garbage can, sleeping on the street, any place that they could sleep. They had a blanket they could spread in the bus station, train station. They would spread it in a corner, any place they could see. That's where they would spend the night. With no money.
I'd heard this commotion out in the hallway one time, and it was winter, and this family was being evicted out of the building. They had 2 children, and we used to play with the kids, and they were the same age. And I went downstairs with my cousin, and here was all their furniture out on the sidewalk, right on the edge of the street, not on the street, but right on the curb, where people could still walk by. But there, I remember seeing their dressers and their couch and different pieces of furniture, and the 2 kids were sitting up on top of one of the dressers, and it was snowing. And I said, my mom came down, and I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, well, they couldn't pay the rent, you know, they got evicted. We suffered a little bit in the Depression for lack of food. Food was scarce. The 4 adults weren't working. My mom found a job working in a hot dog stand, and she was able to bring some of the buns home, and once in a while some of the hot dogs. But my uncle did menial labor now and then, and he was able to bring home some food. I can remember my uncle getting some of the older potatoes from the guy downstairs that we got to know, and bringing them up and making a potato pancake for us. And we were lucky to get an onion in it, ground up, but he would make a good potato pancake. And us cousins would sit on a towel on the center of the living room floor. We didn't have much furniture, and that's what we had to eat for the whole day.
In the city, you had to buy everything you eat. Everything you eat, you had to buy.
We're all probably familiar with these stories and images from the Great Depression. But it's an often forgotten fact that many of these heartrending accounts have a common denominator: location.
Roscoe Bartlett was a Seventh-day Adventist. He was I believe, 20-term U.S. congressman. He lived in West Virginia, off-grid, but he would put on his suit and tie and go and be in Congress. He was one of, I believe, 3 scientists.
As disconcerting as bioterrorism and the pandemic threat is, one factor has contributed more to the utterly dependent state of this nation than any other: electricity.
If you just think today about the world we live in and all of the creature comforts we have, you will recognize that essentially none of them would be there without electricity. It is the power source for almost everything out there. You can't communicate. If the electrons don't flow in your car, the gasoline won't explode in the cylinders and you won't go down the road. So if you cut off the flow of electrons in our world today, it's just a whole different world. And the grid upon which we depend for almost everything is very vulnerable. It is just at the tipping point, is the way that the experts will characterize it. Our demand has grown, and the grid has grown just barely enough to keep up with demand. And it is really almost a Rube Goldberg kind of thing. And the least little perturbation can bring parts of the grid tumbling down, as happened in Florida not very long ago. The great Northeast blackout of several years ago. A tree limb fell on a wire out in Ohio and caused a great blackout half a dozen years or so ago. Any little thing can bring down large parts of the grid. It is very vulnerable to terrorists. I am told that there are a dozen substations in the country that are so critical to the function of the grid that if terrorists took out those dozen substations, the grid would come down. And could have events in the future where the power grid will go down and it's not in any reasonable time coming back on. For instance, if when the power grid went down, some of our large transformers were destroyed, damaged beyond use. We don't make any of those in this country. They're made overseas, and you order one, and 18 months to 2 years later, they will deliver it. Our power grid is very vulnerable. It is very much on the edge. Our military knows that. And sometimes it's very difficult to do what they call a black start. That is, to start without electricity. Many of the things that produce electricity need electricity to start them spinning. If you don't have electricity, how do you do that? They call it a black start. And many of our big power producing turbines and so forth cannot do a black start. They've got to have electricity from somewhere else to charge them and get them spinning so that they can then start making electricity. If you go do a Google search and go on the web, this isn't some strange knowledge that the Congress has and nobody else has. It's out there. This is pretty widely known that our grid is very vulnerable. And if you just think about all the things that are important in your life, how many of them wouldn't be there if the grid has gone down? You can get some measure as to what the world is going to be like, what your country is going to be like, what your community is going to be like if we don't have power.
So here's the danger of the grid going down.
A panel of experts at the Universal Peace Federation has now issued a warning on the growing threat of EMP or electromagnetic pulse weapons. Such an attack can knock out virtually all communications and other critical services of countries in a matter of minutes. For long, experts have warned that key electrical infrastructure in the United States remains particularly vulnerable to an electromagnetic pulse attack or EMP, likely to be orchestrated by China, North Korea, or even Russia. The Universal Peace Federation specialists have now said that the US is at a pivotal moment if it wants to avoid a potential doomsday scenario. But to analyze the risk, we must first understand what an EMP is and how it can be weaponized. An EMP weapon is one that directs a massive explosion of energy over an intended target, much like lightning. But in contrast to other conventional weapons, an EMP explosion does not physically harm humans. What it does, though, is cripple all electronic devices and infrastructure within its radius. The weapon at first is glided directly above an intended target. These weapons, according to the US nomenclature, are classified as high-altitude electromagnetic pulse or HEMP. A HEMP attack can interfere with radio frequency and instantly produce damaging voltage in electronic devices across thousands of miles. It can hinder fuel distribution, transport, food and water supply, and most importantly, communications, especially military communications. Such attacks can permanently immobilize vehicles with modern electronic ignition and control systems. Several congressional hearings and commissions in the US have flagged the vulnerabilities of the American power grid. In 2015, a congressional committee testified in a joint hearing to discuss EMP weapons and preparedness. It asserted that a nationwide grid collapse, either via HEMP attacks or other conventional methods, had the potential to wipe out up to 90% of the American population.
Did you hear that? 90% of the American population could be destroyed by EMP, not because you would feel it or hear it or make you sick or anything, but everything you depend on would no longer work. Now here's a physical attack. That's an EMP. That's an explosion taking out the grid. This is a physical attack on the grid. Oops.
Former Federal Energy Regulatory Chairman John Wellinghoff said that last April's sniper attack on a power station near San Jose, California, was an act of domestic terrorism. The little-known attack occurred before 1 a.m. on April 16th of last year. A group of attackers cut telecommunications cables in an underground vault near Highway 101. The assailants then approached a Metcalf transmission substation. After sending out a signal by flashlight, they fired AK-47s at its transformers. More than 100 shell casings were later found at the site. They seem to have targeted the transformers' oil-filled cooling systems, which began leaking oil after numerous gunshots. The transformers did not explode, and the attackers fled the scene after waving the flashlight again. Wellinghoff said he was going public because he was concerned about national security and worried that larger-scale attacks on electric grid sites are now in the works.
So the fear that resulted from that incident, which was quite a few years ago, was that it was a test by domestic terrorists, and that if it worked, which it did, then what they could do is they could have a group of them, one group at each of the critical substations, that they could take them all down at the same time. That hasn't happened yet, but that's the fear.
Power stations are often surrounded by security fencing and guarded by round-the-clock patrols. But the real danger may not come from a physical attack on a facility, but through cyber attacks on the connected sites by hackers thousands of miles away.
We're seeing people looking for vulnerabilities, people scanning to see what types of openings they can find.
Inside the nation's largest power grid operator, cybersecurity experts keep watch for intruders 24/7. An Associated Press investigation found that the networks running the U.S. power grid remain vulnerable, despite repeated warnings by cybersecurity experts and increased efforts to stop the attacks.
We're still in this era where everyone believes it's secure by default, and it's not.
The Associated Press says that nearly a dozen times in the past decade, foreign hackers have gained remote access to networks that run the grid, which supplies power to the military, mass transit, businesses, and millions of Americans. While none of the intrusions resulted in the catastrophic blackouts lasting days or even weeks feared by the intelligence community, that possibility remains.
It's all real. It's all, there's lots of variables, lots of potentials that could happen.
Identifying the source of cyber attacks is notoriously difficult, but private firms have alleged that recent attacks launched against the U.S. power grid were carried out by hacking teams within Russia, China, and Iran, some with their government's support. Even the Islamic State terrorist group is trying to hack American power companies, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Security experts say the country's power system is aging and outdated, never built with network security in mind, and fixes often take way too long.
In the case of a large cyber attack on the U.S., we can't be calling up vendors and having them say, sorry, it's going to take us 8 months to get this patched.
But the experts believe hackers may have already infiltrated networks that control parts of the grid, even if they have not yet used that access to turn out the lights.
So the significance here is that it's believed that China, Russia, Iran, etc. have already infiltrated and put a worm in these control systems for the grid, and that all they have to do is tell it to do it, and it would do it. But it's already in. Now, we have counsel from the Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White had quite a bit of counsel about getting out of harm's way. Let's look at some of the reasons in review of the counsel to leave the cities. First of all, it's for the sake of the children. Instead of crowded city, seek some retired situation. I researched the word retired. She doesn't mean retired as in I'm retired. It means some quiet place. Some retired situation where your children will be, so far as possible, shielded from temptation, and there train and educate them for usefulness. Another one is to avoid danger. The time is near when the large cities will be visited by the judgments of God. In a little while, these cities will be terribly shaken. I have a handout with links to my website with videos. Check out the one about the dangers to the cities, because have you heard about Nashville? About Ellen White prophesied about Nashville being hit? San Francisco, Oakland, etc. I delved in Las Vegas. I looked into all of these and show some of that on that video. So the handout will have tell you where to find that. Avoid destruction. Calamities will come. Calamities most awful, most unexpected, and these destructions will follow one after another. A call to prepare. Before the overflowing scourge shall come upon the dwellers of the earth, the Lord calls upon all who are Israelites indeed to prepare for that event. So we have the admonition to prepare because we know it's going to come. Not one family in 100 will be improved physically, mentally, or spiritually by residing in the city. Faith, hope, love, happiness can far better be gained in retired, there's that word again, places where there are fields and hills and trees. If, in the providence of God, we can secure places away from the cities, the Lord would have us do this. There are troublous times before us. So it's going to be the providence of God. It's going to be God leading you to make these moves. And like the priests at the river, they had to stick their feet in the water before God would do the miracles. So there will be some times where we need to step out in faith a bit, but Ellen White also counsels about not do it presumptuously and unprepared and doomed for failure. But to just sit back and not do anything is not what God wants us to do. The time has come, present tense, when, as God opens the way, notice God is opening the way, parents should move out of the cities, the children should be taken into the country. Now, sometimes you get the impression, well, I gotta be off grid, I gotta buy land, I gotta have a big house and all this stuff. Notice what she says, parents can secure small homes in the country where with land for cultivation, where they can have orchards, where they can raise vegetables and small fruits. It doesn't say anything about owning it. It talks about securing it. Yep, God might provide it for free. God might arrange it where you can house sit. God might provide it where a couple of families can do it together. God might provide it for you to rent it. The word is secure. It doesn't say buy it. And it also doesn't say you have to have a big, sprawling estate. A small home in the country. The key is to be able to raise your own produce. As God's commandment-keeping people, we must leave the cities. As did Enoch, we must work in the cities, but not dwell in them. I was told of some Adventist, well-meaning Adventist, who lives 50 miles off the pavement in Idaho. 50 miles. How in the world are you going to minister to the cities if you're 50 miles from the pavement? I think we need to have a balance between preparing for ourselves and doing our job to be able to help other people. Again and again, the Lord's instructed our people to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions. Why? In the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a serious one. So we have lots of reasons to move to the country for the family, for the kids, for your salvation. But to me, this is the one that changed my life, is we need to do it because when the little time of trouble comes and we can't buy or sell, we need to be able to survive. Not only for ourselves, but maybe even to help people in need, our neighbors and stuff like that. So, what about if you're in the city, how can you learn how to garden? Here's some examples I've found on the internet. I don't live on the 10th floor in an apartment, so I haven't done this, but I found some really creative things that you can think about if you're not out yet. And tomorrow, I'm going to address what if you're still in the city, but you have a backyard. You don't even have a yard. You don't have a blade of grass in this particular scenario, okay? Now in this case, notice the background. How far off the ground are these people? They're quite a ways. 6 or 7 floors, I would say. Now this is pretty cool. They're going to show you, and there's no sound, I'll just narrate it, but they're growing cherry tomatoes fastened to a cement wall. This could be 10 feet off the ground, it could be 10 stories off the ground. But watch what they do, this is pretty cool. They take a cherry tomato, they cut it in half, and they scrape the seeds onto a slice of banana. And then they take some potting soil and they put it in this little container. Then they take these sliced bananas with the seeds on them and they position them on top of that soil. Then they put some more soil on the top. Then they turn it into a little greenhouse. Well, they did a little watering, not a lot. Then they turned it into a little greenhouse and just left it outside. Now they're developing the planter. So they take a liter pop bottle jug and they're taking a knife and they're cutting little triangles near the top. They cut the handle off because it's going to be upside down. They don't need the handle. Then they cut the top out so that they can have a place to put stuff in it. You want to be careful you don't cut yourself. Then they take a solder gun. I suppose you could do it with a knife, but they're poking holes in what will be the bottom. So if you get too much water in it, it would weep out. And I don't know what this guy used to fasten it to the concrete, but he hammered it in. There are some there's some nails you can nail into concrete. Yeah. So I don't know if this is a patio or the end of their foundation of their building or what, but it's just nailed to the wall. So they put in some soil, about a third of the way. 5 days later, the little greenhouse has done a good job. Look at that, 5 days. Nice, healthy little starts. Then they take these little starts and they put them in the triangle hole, tamp it in. That's all there is to it. Put in some more water on top and inside. "10 days later. Now, if you look closely, they used a little twist tie to fasten the stem to it. See the white? And that way it'll keep it from falling over. Someone in my previous session said at Weimar, they let them go upside down and just let them hang. Said that's what nature wants to do, let them go. I think the reason we do them upright is to keep them from in the dirt. In this case, you're up in the air, so it wouldn't matter. So they put in some more soil, put in some more water. Nice and healthy looking plants. 25 days later, look at that crop. It's loaded. That's as many on one stem as you get from when you buy at the store where they're commercially doing it. I thought that was pretty cool. How much money does that cost to do that? Nothing. Really. Some potting soil. A leftover banana. Okay, here's a high-rise balcony gardening. How high do you think she is above the ground? I mean, you're looking down on roofs of buildings here. Has to be 10 stories, I would think. And it's not a very big deck, but they're making good use of it. So what's the advantage if you live in the city to be doing this kind of thing? You're learning. You're learning how to garden. You can't just snap your fingers and know how to garden. How long does it take from when you plant a fruit tree to get enough fruit to be productive? Long time, 5 years maybe. And then I can tell you, my wife's the gardener and I'm the fence builder, but You know, she's constantly learning. She'll watch YouTubes all the time about different ideas and stuff of how to garden and different kinds of plants, and she'll buy the seeds that will replicate themselves, not the hybrid ones. And some of them work good, some of them don't, that she'll not use them anymore. We had like 10 different kinds of tomatoes in the greenhouse, and then we'd log when they were ripe, and we'd go together, we'd take a tomato, slice it, we'd log on the sheet, how did it look, how firm was the skin, what was the flavor like, how prolific was the plant, so that she could eliminate the ones that didn't work very good and fine tune this. The point is, you can't just wait until you have to get in the country and say a Sunday law, and then you think you know how to garden to be able to get enough food to live all year. Come on, you got to learn how to do it, so you can do it even if you're living in an apartment. Now here's one. This lady has a garden, but she wanted to have a planter with herbs right next to her kitchen on her patio.
I decided to build a solar-powered, self-watering, super stylish, modular planter that's totes easy to build. This planter design had to meet some very specific criteria. First, it had to look good because it's up at the house and my husband Adam has very fancy taste. It also had to completely care for itself because I'm not exaggerating when I say I leave the house in the morning to go milk the cow and I very rarely come back before it's time to cook dinner. And of course the last thing is that it needs to be easily accessible to the kitchen, which it is. Using these storage totes in this design was not only convenient for me because I just moved across the country and had a whole bunch of them to spare, but also because it literally allows me to have a modular garden. I could have 6 different planters planted with different plants and switch them out as needed. The real magic of the self-watering garden starts right here. This solar panel collects the sun's energy and powers a little timer attached to a pump. The timer tells the pump when to go off, and the pump, using these 2 little sensors, can gather water from any kind of rain collecting device. The water is sucked up through this little filter, through this tube, all the way up to the garden. I absolutely love this planter for so many reasons. It's easy to build. It actually only cost me about $10 worth of materials to build the whole thing. It provides the herbs right by my kitchen where I wanted them. The solar-powered rain collection system delivers water right to my plants, but not so much that it drips down on my deck and makes a mess. I also really love this planter design because it's completely adaptable to whatever your needs may be. If you have deck space for this exact design, great. But if you're in a rental situation where you don't have space for a permanent garden, you can actually lose the legs off of here and add more modules so that you have even more growing space that's still completely portable.
And that self-timer watering deal is pretty cool. Okay, now here's just some pictures of some strawberries that they put in paint buckets, looks like. And then you can see they're up about the 5th floor. Pretty productive. And limited space.
I've been gardening for many years now using only containers and very limited space. My balcony is only 84 square feet and I pack it with anywhere from 25 to 30 plants every spring, summer, and fall. Over the years, I've learned quite a lot growing in containers and utilizing my small space, and I want to share some of that knowledge with you guys today, hopefully inspire a few of you to get growing no matter what size your outdoor space is. So let's go ahead and get started. My first tip for growing in a small space is to make sure you are utilizing your vertical space. One way I do this is growing in a stackable planter. I love using this planter to grow all different types of lettuces, which is what I'm showing here, but you could easily grow other plants as well as long as they have a shallow root system. In this planter, I'm growing about 12 heads of lettuce, so you could see just how much you can grow in such a small space. I highly recommend you try this if you're looking to grow more in less space. Another way I utilize my vertical space is by growing in hanging baskets. I've grown strawberries every year in my hanging baskets because they drape over the edge of the container. It keeps them away from squirrels and pests as they're hanging in the air. And yeah, you can grow a lot of strawberries. I like to grow the ever-bearing variety so you get multiple harvests throughout the season. Here is my hanging basket that I use for all of my herbs, and this is another great way to plant multiple herbs together in a small space. You can also use different trellises or supports for your plant to get it to grow upwards. So this is a sugar pea, this is actually a dwarf variety, and I've just used a trellis to keep the plant growing upwards. I've also done this for my cucumber plant, cherry tomato plant, and different ones that you want to grow up taller instead of wider. This allows the plant to be more compact while also providing it with support as it grows. Moving on to tip number 2, which is really important, and that's growing container-friendly plants. When you're growing in containers, it really does matter which type of plants you are choosing. Certain varieties do better in containers, and it can get a little confusing with how many different seeds there are. One of the main things you're going to be looking for on the package is a dwarf, patio, or bush variety of seeds. So this is a bush variety of cucumber opposed to a vining. It's going to grow a lot better in a container. Along with bush zucchini, it's the same kind of thing. You don't really want a huge vining plant. It's better to grow a bush variety that's more compact. Another great choice for containers is tomatoes, and you most likely want to grow a determinate variety, so that's one that doesn't continue to grow in size. It'll only grow to a few feet tall and then set all of its fruit. I prefer growing this in my container garden as it takes up way less space than an indeterminate variety. Another type of seed to look for is a bush variety of green beans. This is a tender green. You can also grow all different types of peppers in containers. They're only going to grow to be 3 to 4 feet tall, so they make really good container plants. I love growing banana peppers, hot peppers, bell peppers. Any type that you like is going to do really well in a container. Another thing I really enjoy planting is kale, and this is of course a dwarf variety of kale. This type of kale doesn't get too big, but it's still very high producing. And as I mentioned earlier, strawberries are another great choice. They are a container-friendly plant. They do really well in containers, and they definitely are a staple in my summer garden. Leafy greens are another great choice for your small space garden. All different types of varieties are going to do really well in a container with limited space. Some of my favorites include romaine, loose leaf lettuce blends, arugula, spinach, and Swiss chard. Tip number 3 is companion planting. This is a great way to maximize the space in your garden. Planting multiple plants together also allows for better pest control, pollination, and just overall improving the health of your plant. I like to do this every year with my herb garden, so here are a few herb companions: basil, rosemary, oregano, thyme, parsley, dill. All of these herbs are going to grow really well together. If you're planting tomatoes in your small space garden, there's quite a few companions. They include basil, marigolds, lettuces, and carrots. Marigolds in particular can help keep away unwanted pests and insects, and basil is said to enhance the flavor of your tomatoes. If you're a pepper lover like me, popular companions include oregano, marjoram, basil, onions, and lettuces. Similar to tomatoes, basil will help your peppers taste better, and oregano, marjoram, and lettuces acts as a ground cover around your peppers. This helps to crowd out weeds and unwanted insects from getting to your plants. Another way I like to take advantage of companion planting is by planting multiple lettuces together. Lettuce has all different companions, but a few of my favorites to mix together that I think grow really well together is anything from spinach to arugula, romaine, and leaf lettuces. You can really experiment and grow a whole bunch of different lettuces in the same small space. My final tip for this video is going to be succession planting. This is a great way to make sure you have a continuous supply and you always have something to harvest in your garden. Succession planting is the practice of seeding your crops at intervals of 7 to 21 days. So maybe you have a few plants already growing in your container like I do here, and then I'm going to go ahead and sow some new seeds. That way I always have a continuous supply to harvest from. I really enjoy doing this with my leafy greens, my green onions, and chives. I'm just showing a close-up of the container here. You can see the larger ones that have already grown to full size. and I've gone ahead and sowed a few more seeds into the container, so as I harvest and use these green onions, I have new fresh growth popping up in the bottom. This is a foolproof way to utilize your small space and make sure that you always have something fresh growing in the garden. Here is my lettuce container. You can see the larger growth and then the smaller little seedlings that have popped up. It also does really well for how the plant grows. Look how dense and full this lettuce is. And I'm going to show you by pulling back some of the leaves here that I do still have the smaller growth in the corners. Just make sure that the seedlings that are smaller are still getting adequate sunlight. I also do this with my herbs. Here's an example of my dill. So lots of growth happening, and I've sown a bunch of seeds in the bottom. So as I trim this away, I have more fresh dill growing.
I'm going to give you a handout which has the website name, and I just want you to know there's different categories. These are the first 2 live seminars like this one, and there's a whole section on country living. I'll tell you about different ones later, but there's a bunch of them, including EMP dangers. We call it grid down. So here's things on the list. Go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com and then find that part number. So part number 2 is urban dangers, end of life as we know it. That's an expanded version of what we talked about. Number 4, sustainable independence and sustainability. Signs to leave the cities, when to leave the cities. Walter White has a quick answer on that one. Warning against the cities, country living in Bible prophecy, country living in the spirit of prophecy, biblical examples of country living, loud cry and warning the cities, exercising faith to move out of the cities, country living on a budget, money-saving tips, EMP dangers and prevention, living without electricity, how to build a Faraday cage. That's a device to protect your electronics from getting damaged by an EMP, what to put in a Faraday cage, how to make it, what can make the grid go down and surviving a winter storm, and EMP preparedness. So those categories are on that handout in case some of those are something that you'd like to check out. Preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com is the website, and here are some recommended printed resources. We talked about what if the grid goes down, we don't have internet. Yeah, there were 400 videos, but now I can't get to them anymore. I can't get to YouTube, and I need to know an answer of how do I do this. That's why I printed the book, Country Living, Sustainable Country Living. But here are my favorites. Of course, Ellen White's Country Living book. You can either buy that or you can get it for free off the Ellen White website. And Sustainable Preparedness, which is the seminar that made us make our 180-degree turn. That's available in paperback or an ebook. Last year at British Columbia camp meeting, I got acquainted with Crystal Whitten. She had been a professor at Loma Linda University, and she wrote a 600-page book called Country Living. And right now she's in Africa. Her best girlfriend is the president of Adventist University and trying to convince her to take her job. So I don't know, haven't heard back whether she took it or not, but anyway, that's a good resource. Strategic relocation, if you're considering moving, this is a really, really good book. It's written by a guy who I believe is a Mormon, Joel Skousen. I've been to a couple of his presentations. And what happened is he's let's see what time it is here. But he's a guy that was in the business of consulting architects who were building really high-end, expensive houses. And his job was how to incorporate a hidden safe room in the house. And so that was his business. And then Y2K came along, and people were saying, hey, where should I move? And he'd say, well, that's not my area. I'm doing the safe houses. And he'd say, yeah, but you know more about it than anybody. So he and his son embarked on a deep dive research on where are the pros and cons of everywhere basically in the world, and especially in North America. And this book goes into detail. You can say, well, I'm considering Montana, and it'll have homeschool tolerance, it'll have the economy, it'll have the pay, it'll have dangers for the military, attacks, et cetera, all these different categories, and show maps. Do you realize that Montana and North Dakota, though they are remote, are one of the biggest targets for military? They have nuclear silos in those places, so they show all of them. And anyway, then You Can Survive. This is Jerry Franklin. I've been to his seminars before. He's since passed away. He's from British Columbia. You Can Survive he's an Adventist guy. They used to do a week-long, I think they still do, his family still does, a week-long country live-in experience where they build a cabin out of logs and all this kind of stuff. Out of the Cities is Dave Westbrook. He was responsible for some of the clips I showed. The Country Way, this is Lloyd Amy. He taught biology at PUC, and he has passed away since, but he became a good friend. He wrote the book Country Way, which is textbook. It was his textbook for his class, the country living at PUC back in the 70s. And then the Ellen White book, Country Living, when it came out, then there was another companion book that came out that you may have never heard of. It's called From City to Country. And it was co-authored by Arthur White and E.A. Sutherland. It's available at ABC, I think. And then here's my book, A Guide to Living Through Troubled Times, a detailed look at moving out of the cities and preparing for a peaceful country lifestyle. It's available in print, an ebook, an audiobook.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.